Our final team preparation video will deal with the subject of communicating back home while you're on the field and communicating to the church when you arrive back home. Believe it or not, communication from the field to family members back home has become a real source of frustration for a lot of field missionaries. Before the advent of cell phones, this was really no problem. But today, everyone has a cell phone in hand, and there are very few places left on our planet where there's not some type of cell service. Even in some of the remote locations where we minister in Brazil, if we get in the right spot, we can pick up a sufficient cell signal to send out a text or make a short voice call. So we must be wise in how we communicate back home. I want to give you several pointers. First, please realize that we are working within a security-sensitive people group. Our mission depends upon the fact that we cannot be discovered by governmental authorities. So we ask that you limit the size of your digital footprint as it relates to things like names of villages, people groups, and locations in Brazil. Please, whatever you do, do not publish sensitive information on social media sites. We also request that you turn off the location identifying capabilities of your devices. This is all of ultimate importance because if we are ever discovered, our work in Brazil will be terminated, our visas canceled, mission over. So, your communication and how you handle your cell phone while you're on the field is of ultimate importance, and the consequences are very high, if not for you personally, at least for our career missionaries and for the ongoing work of reaching the quilombolas. Second, as it relates to voice calls back home, we ask that you try to limit your voice calls back home to once or twice per trip. And when calling back home, be very general in your conversation. Do not share specific information about team members. Trust me, people back home are already apprehensive about you being out of the United States of America. They do not need anything else to give them a source of worrying or anxiety. In the minds of the people whom you left back home, small problems are always exaggerated to the worst case scenario. I remember one team that came to the field had a team member that became ill. And they had a rather low fever, and we were able to deal with it. But the next day, my cell phone blew up from people involved within our mission agency and from the church of this team. And they were wanting to know what we were doing about this team member who was in critical condition in a Brazilian hospital. You see, there's something that takes place in the minds of people back home between their receiving the message and your sending the message that causes that message to be greatly exaggerated. So please be very general in your conversations and be very general in the things that you share. You just basically want your family members back home to know that you're still alive, you're doing all right, and y'all are having a great time serving the Lord on the front lines of global missions in Brazil. Now, once you get back home, remember that your influence as a missionary is just beginning. You will either be an ambassador for missions or a hindrance and confirmation in the minds of carnal church members as to why the church shouldn't be wasting money on missions anyway. So once you're back home, you will be sharing with the church and reporting some of the things that you've experienced. And I think it's biblical for mission teams to gather the church as they did in Acts chapter 13 and 14 and talk about what was accomplished on the mission field. But there are some things that I want you to keep in mind. want you to be very intentional when you're preparing to give a testimony, whether it is on a videotape or whether it will be live in a service. There's a few pointers that will help you be an ambassador for missions and a mobilizing agent as it relates to missions rather than a hindrance to missions. The first thing is focus on what God did in taking the gospel to the unreached. Now remember, we're dealing with unreached people, so you're not going to have stories of thousands of people getting saved. But if we were successfully able to enter an unreached Quilombola village, gather them, earn their trust, and share 4 or 5 pre-evangelism Bible stories with them, then that is a huge victory and a huge success, and we started the course of reaching them for the glory of Christ. So focus on what God did in taking the gospel to the unreached. Everything must be measured in light of this ultimate missional purpose. Number 2, highlight the things which God accomplished in your own life. You see, most of the time God does more in us than He does through us. You are going to be a better person because of what you've experienced on the mission field as you take the gospel to the Quilombolas of Brazil. Talk about the personal, spiritual benefits that this mission trip has brought to your life. Third, avoid talking about the uncomfortable and inconvenient aspects of the mission trip. You see, there are always going to be problems. There are always going to be airport delays. There are always going to be vehicle malfunctions. There are always going to be mess up with hotel accommodations, and there's always going to be mosquitoes and things of this nature. But the best advice that I can give you is this. Let's determine in our hearts, before we even leave, that we're going to be the type of believers and we're going to be the type of missionaries that Satan cannot make us complain about what we encounter on this mission trip. After all, God is worthy of whatever inconvenience and whatever discomfort we must go through in order to see that He is glorified among people who have never heard His name. So the litmus test of our trip, once we get back home, is this. Will more people want to become a globally conscious believer because of your testimony and because of your influence, or will more people be convinced of the non-necessity of missions? Our prayer is that God will use you as an influencer for the good for global missions. Our prayer is that you will become a mission mobilizer in your own right, because He is worthy of the worship of those who have never heard. And one thing that we need on the mission field is more missionaries proclaiming the beautiful message that Jesus Christ came to save, seek, and save that which is lost. Thank you for your attention. We look forward to working with you on the field. May God bless you and use you mightily as you put your hand to the plow of global missions.